Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today at Coffee and Quality. If you have been to Coffee and Quality before, welcome back. So glad you're here. If you are brand new to Coffee and Quality, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you found us. We want to help warm up the chat this morning. Please share your name, your agency, and what's bringing you joy today? Today, yesterday, tomorrow, just share a little bit of that with us. As I got to tell you, I'm so excited for your presenter today, this topic, because every time I get the chance to talk to Autumn Horne, that brings me joy. And so I'm bringing you joy today with this, with her, with the topic. I can't wait for this time for us to learn and grow together in Coffee and Quality. So, as always, a reminder of what the Coffee and Quality space is. This is your opportunity to learn and grow together. Please, this is a safe space to share and learn, which really just means ask the questions, put them in the chat, raise the hand feature, come off on mute, chime in. We want to hear from you. This is your time to soak in this information so you can bring it back to the work you're doing across your work with data, evaluation, continuous quality improvement, whatever that might look like within your organization. Please have an open mind and open heart. What that means is sometimes you're going to hear something that really resonates with you, and other times you're going to hear something that maybe pushes you outside of a comfort zone or outside something that you're like, but wait, I thought it was more like this. So have that open mind and open heart as you hear from the presenter, as you hear from other folks, as you just digest this information. Please participate by sharing your knowledge and experience. Today's session is going to be interactive. There's going to be opportunities for you to get your hands on into some of this generative AI business. And so I want you to embrace that in this time together we have. But as always, it's an invitation, not an obligation. So please engage as you feel comfortable. And so many folks are sharing in the chat. Please keep warming it up. Share your name, your agency, and what brings you joy today. I have two more commercials before I hand it over to Autumn. And so my first commercial is, yes, we have these quarterly sessions. Our next one is coming up. We actually have a special one in July and then another one again in August. But in the meantime, please find your way into United Way of Greater Houston Teams Partner account, the channel. We have a Coffee and Quality channel there where we post resources, trainings, all kinds of goodies between these quarterly sessions. And so I want you to join us over there. It's welcome for all. All you have to do is put your name in the chat, your name and email in the chat, and we'll get you added. Many of you are already in the Teams account, but if you would like to be added, please just throw your email and name in the chat. All right. We also have a special opportunity happening right now. Some friends over at Rice University, Kinder Institute, and then the School of Social Sciences, they're working on a planning grant to really build an academic program centered around evaluation. And so if you're interested in sharing your input on what an academic program for evaluation should look like, should feel like, please sign up for one of their listening sessions. They have two more coming up in May. And they want to hear from folks across nonprofits, across government organizations, across education, healthcare. They want to hear from them all. So please check that out if you're free and around. I hear they feed you. And so please, please check it out if you can. So the other thing, I know sometimes folks have to drop before time is over, before our session ends. And so I'm going to try something new today and give you the feedback form and the link to register for upcoming Coffee and Qualities before we get started. So you can have that for whenever you go about your merry way. I will put this on the end. I'll have this at the end though, again, in case folks are able to hang on with us for the whole time, but I know y'all will. So thank you all so much. Those are my couple of commercials. Um, I am really excited now to hand it over to Autumn Horne. Autumn is an amazing senior research analyst over at Kinder Institute for Rice University at in the HERC, so it's Houston Education Research Consortium. She does quite a few things over there. She is also my data visualization guru. And so I'm really excited for her to dive into this topic with y'all today on using generative AI to support data analysis. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Autumn.
Good morning, everyone. I am incredibly honored you all chose to spend the next hour, hour and a half with me today exploring a topic that I have found really fascinating for like two, I guess almost 3 years now. As Jessica mentioned, this is not going to be just like a me talking at you kind of thing. I think I do have a lot of maybe interesting things, hopefully that you haven't heard before, that I'm going to share with you that you can take away. But I also built this in a way that you all actually get to get your hands dirty, if you will, trying some of the things that I'm doing at the same time as I'm doing them. Because the interesting thing about generative AI, some interesting, confusing, scary, whatever, what have you, it's not like R or Excel or Power BI or Tableau, where like if you do what I do exactly, you get the same output exactly, right? AI is a lot different in that it remembers things about you. It remembers what you work on. It's making predictions. And so what it sort of gives you is going to look different from what it gives me. And I think a lot of our interesting discussion today is going to kind of come out of that feature, if you will, of AI. So before we jump in here, I have the slides, a PDF of the slides, and a PDF of all of the prompts we're going to be using in the chat right now. I'll drop those in there periodically throughout the session. But I just wanted you all to have those to reference in case I'm moving ahead, you want to look back, or in case you need to pop out early. Let me go ahead and get my screen set up here. Okay. So I want to start with a little pulse check. We're going to see how this goes. On your phone or in a separate web browser, can you all go to slido.com and enter this code 9398291? I'll put it in the chat too. And I'm just giving you space to kind of anonymously answer a poll here. How have you been feeling lately when you think about generative AI? So that's the website, slido.com, and then the code is 9398291. I'm going to give people about 30 seconds to respond here, and then we're going to see how people are feeling. Get the temperature before we jump in. Let's see. Okay. Great. We've got some people who are feeling really smart, maybe a little nerdy about it. We've got some heads exploding here. About a quarter of you have your head exploding lately when you think about generative AI. I want to know who this one person who's feeling a little sleepy is. I'm glad you in particular came today. I am truly honored. I've got some star eyes here and maybe a little fear, maybe a little trepidation. So we got about a quarter each, a huge, except for this maybe one person who's feeling a little sleepy. We've got a range of emotions. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with a technology that's changing as rapidly as generative AI is. Hopefully today, we're going to move some of you from the maybe head exploding or fear and trepidation towards more of that like star eyes, nerding out about what this technology can do with you. So to do that, today's plan is to spend just a little bit of time up front, about 5 minutes or so, talking about, okay, what do I mean when I say generative AI? What kind of tools am I talking about? And what are the like key techniques to make this technology work for you. But we're going to spend most of our time talking about like actual examples of how I use AI in the data life cycle in my own work with data. We're going to spend some time talking about how it can be used to think through our analysis questions and plans, as well as both qualitative and quantitative analysis. I'm going to both start and end actually with the like ethical and security concerns that sort of come along with, I think, any new technology as it's emerging and developing really rapidly. But we're going to spend some special time at the end devoted to those concerns. And one way that I think we can put some guardrails around this technology to address those concerns, which is having guidelines either for yourself or for your organization in terms of when you will, when you won't use AI in the data lifecycle, and what you will do and what you won't do to protect the people that your data represents when you're using AI. Oh, I love someone said holding multiple truths in my feelings in the chat here. True, maybe it was a bit of a false dichotomy I was creating here. Probably a lot of you feeling multiple feelings when it comes to AI and how it fits into your work and your life. The most important thing to remember, though, I think just conceptually, is that AI is like a powerful assistant, right? It's like a really smart office mate or intern. It's not a replacement for you, the human analyst. In my experience, AI has really only been useful or effective when I'm layering on top of it a lot of deep knowledge about my own context and my own data problems and my own, what I know about interpreting data. In that case, AI has been really powerful, but I've never felt, and you'll see in a lot of these examples, it's not replacing me, it's more so supporting me. So I want to get that out of the way kind of at the front. I'm not really going to show you like a one-stop shop, if you will, for data analysis with AI. I'm going to show you lots of a menu, if you will, of ways that you can like implement AI into your own practices. So I said I was going to bookend this discussion with these ethical and security considerations. We're going to spend some time talking more about these at the end. But really, I put them up front to say, as we work through examples, as we look at like actual conversations that I'm having with the AI chatbot, I want you to think about where some of these ethical and security issues, like data privacy, exacerbating bias, transparency and accountability about when and how we're using AI, security, compliance, and then also something I've been trying to think about a lot more, which is like community trust and informed consent, how those things sort of come into play when we're using AI in these different ways. Everything that I'm going to be showing you today is like, we're going to be working with fake data sets, like totally generated out of thin air by me. But that's not going to be the case, right? In any of our day-to-day lives, when we leave here, we're going to be thinking about all of these security concerns because that data represents real people when we leave this session today. I also welcome, any comments or questions as we're working through, and I'll open it up specifically. But even if I haven't opened it up, feel free to raise your hand or go into the chat, like Jessica said. If you see like a concern you might have around ethics or security, maybe something you've tried before that went well or didn't go well. I'm also looking at the chat as I'm talking, so feel free to put all of that in there and we'll sort of integrate it into the discussion. So let's start by, I think, getting on the same page about what I mean when I say generative AI, when I say machine learning, because I think one of the ways that we can use these tools responsibly is by understanding at least kind of, on a surface level what they do and how they do it. So AI, artificial intelligence, is an extremely broad term. It represents both a technology or kind of category of technologies and a field of study about how we can get computers to perform the kinds of tasks that we typically think about requiring human intelligence. So that's kind of the big umbrella term, AI. Within that, we have machine learning. So machine learning is a type of AI technology that uses algorithms that are trained to look for patterns in huge amounts of data. And so they learn, but they learn based on whatever data they actually have access to or have been given access to. So all of the sort of examples I'm talking about today, technologies I'm using, all work based on machine learning. It's looking for patterns. Deep learning is an even more kind of complex form of machine learning model. It's designed to have different layers, lots of layers of these sort of interconnected nodes that allow it to learn really complicated patterns. So it's not just like looking for one-to-one connections. It's looking for like a million to a million connections. And then within that, we have generative AI, which is like all of the tools that we're going to be talking about today. This is a type of AI deep learning model that can generate new content like text, code, or images. So the most common tools that you've probably heard about that we're going to be talking about, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, all of those are examples of generative AI chatbots. And then the only thing, we could spend hours, people spend their whole lives understanding how AI, deep learning, machine learning really works. But for our purposes, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that AI, none of these chatbots that we're talking to, that we're asking to partner with us in these kind of like analytical pursuits, we're looking for truth, right? Or our best approximation of the truth as the human analyst. The AI is not doing that. It's not looking for truth. It's looking for patterns in the data, in what you're telling it, in what information it's been trained on, which is why it's so important to double check its work in various ways. Look for bias, hallucinations, so on and so forth. Okay, so what tools are available? What tools are we going to be using? So I would recommend for the things that we work on today, using either ChatGPT or Claude. Both of these are like general purpose generative AI chat bots. You access them through your web browser. So a lot of you have probably played with some of these or maybe use them pretty heavily already. But for those of you who do not, go to, well, all of you actually, if you want to participate in the activities that I'm going to be walking us through, go to your preferred AI service chatbot. I'd recommend either ChatGPT or Claude if you want to follow along the most closely with what I'm doing. Someone just asked, what about Copilot? You can also use Copilot or Gemini for the activities we're going to be using today, especially if you want, like if your work already pays for it or integrates it with your other Microsoft services, you might use Copilot. If you use Google Sheets or kind of the Google Suite as your main sort of document where you keep all your documents, your spreadsheets, you might find it useful to use Gemini, which is Google's AI offering. I only said ChatGPT or Claude because those are the two I use for all my examples. So if you want to kind of follow along as closely as possible, those are the two that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to give you all a minute to just go ahead and get that pulled up, whatever your service of choice is. If you're having some trouble doing that, feel free to drop a question in the chat or raise your hand and we can troubleshoot, because if you're having trouble, someone else is probably having trouble too. And I want anyone who wants to participate to have access to the tools. So while people are getting set up, I'm seeing some interesting comments in the chat already. Yeah, okay. So Chelsea has a really good point here that I don't bring up in this presentation, but is really, I'm glad they brought it up because it's really important to be thinking about. So they say, sometimes I hear about how much power it takes to run AI, and I worry about responsibility to keep our planet healthy and whether the AI query is worth the extra energy use. Yeah, that definitely is a consideration, right? In fact, as our use of AI expands, we're also this is like so beyond the scope of my expertise in this workshop, but it is a really important thing to be thinking about, right? In fact, like as the scope of our AI use expands, we don't even really have enough energy to sort of like support it at the moment if it keeps growing so exponentially. And someone also said, the OpenAI CEO said using polite words such as please can consume lots of energy. I have never heard that before, but that is fascinating. And I'm going to have to look into that more closely too. So yeah, I don't have many answers for you, unfortunately, when it comes to those two comments. If anyone else does, though, please put them in the chat. But it does raise two things for further exploration for me, which is, yeah, one, what is the actual energy use of these tools and how can we use them responsibly? Two really important things to be thinking about. Alicia, I'm going to answer your question a little bit later in the presentation about Claude versus ChatGPT. I'd say anecdotally, a lot of people use Claude more for qualitative and ChatGPT more for quantitative, but that's by no means like a totally binary distinction, and we're going to talk more about that later. Okay. Perfect. Let's move on then. Now we've got some of the tools down. We're thinking about those. We hopefully have access to one of those for some of the examples we're going to work through. Let's also, the last thing I want to talk about really briefly is how you talk to these chatbots. Because I think that, in my experience, has made a lot of difference in terms of how useful these tools are for me and like actually aiding my productivity or expanding my thought rather than just like distracting me or wasting my time. So the sort of field, I guess, of thinking about or optimizing how you guide these AI models or talk to them is called prompting or prompt engineering. Those are some terms that you may have heard as you have sort of learned about generative AI. But prompt engineering is just a fancy way to say we think carefully about how we ask the AI to do things for us. What are some kind of best practices when it comes to prompt engineering? And I'm thinking about this from like a really practical level too. The first thing is that effective prompts usually contain similar elements. The most important two are a task. You tell the model what you want it to do, usually as specifically as you can. And two is context. What are the like background or environmental factors that the AI needs to know about you, your job, the context that you're working in, what your goals are to help it accomplish the task in a way that's actually useful to you, right? So those are the two most important things that effective prompts contain. We're going to look at an example in just a second too to see like what each of these look like in a prompt in practice. In addition to a task and a context, effective prompts also usually contain or often contain a persona. So that's like who you want that chatbot to pretend to be. It can pretend to be pretty much anyone, right? With whatever expertise that person has or that type of person has. And so by telling it who you want it to act as, you can sort of limit the kind of response you get to one that's going to be more helpful. Exemplars are just sort of a fancy way to say examples. These are examples of what success looks like to you in terms of like the output that you want it to give you. So if you've already done a certain type of analysis before, for example, you can give it an example of the code you used and tell it to update the code. That's something for your current data set. That's something that I use sort of an exemplar for in my conversations with the AI quite a bit. And then the last thing is format. So how you want the output to be presented. I, for example, do not want my kind of chatbot, my AI assistant, to ever respond in like long paragraphs, right? I don't want it to respond in like a novel-like way. If I want a novel, read a novel, right? When I talk to the chatbot, I want it to respond in like short paragraphs with lists and category headings, things like that. So that's sort of an example of what you can tell it in terms of how you want your output to be presented. Someone just messaged me and said if they've never used Claude or Chat GPT for this exercise, do they need to create an account? You do, I think, need to create an account for both Claude. I think for any of these tools, you need to create an account, but you do not need to pay for anything to do any of these activities. So if you create an account, don't, just use your Gmail or your work email or whatever. But you do not need to sign up for any sort of paid plan to do anything that we're going to be doing today. Okay, so let's look at an example here. Yeah, okay, perfect. We got a confirmation in the chat. You can try it for free and you don't need to register. Okay, good. So you don't need to register. Perfect. So if you don't want to register at all, try ChatGPT. It looks like, at least for that one, you don't need to put in an email or anything like that. Okay, so let's look at an example of a prompt. This is one we're actually going to be using later for helping us think through analysis plans and analysis questions. And the prompt is sort of broken down into like these individual pieces that I'm saying these effective prompts contain, so you can see what they might look like in practice. Okay, so this prompt starts with, I would like help developing analysis questions and an analysis plan for my nonprofit's volunteer data. That's like the big picture task that I want help with. And then I go on to say, give it some context. I say our data includes a volunteer ID, the name, date joined, the hours they've worked, their role, and our organizational goal for the data is to improve retention of our coordinators, which is like a special volunteer role that we're interested in. So that's some context about the task. I also give it a persona, acting as an experienced data strategist at a mid-sized Houston community health nonprofit. I would like you to, and then I give it the very specific task that I want. Generate 3 to 5 analysis questions we could explore and provide those to me with bulleted lists and a high-level plan to answer each question. So this is like a really long prompt, right? I found that well, I guess it's not really long, it's pretty mid-size. It took me a little bit to develop this prompt, right? It took me a couple tries. And I find that the more open-ended my question is, this is a pretty open-ended thing to ask for. I usually have more success when I give more detail in the prompt. So that's kind of where I'm coming from there. But we'll actually run this prompt in a minute and see what it does. A few other things I want to mention quickly for prompt engineering that I use a lot to help me talk to the AI more effectively. The first one is that sometimes it's hard to know what context the model might actually need to give you a helpful response. So take this example. It's hard to know if I want the AI to help me come up with analysis plan, analysis questions to like start my thinking. It's kind of hard to know what it might need to do that effectively. So actually what I did to develop that prompt is I told it I wanted it to help me come up with an analysis plan and analysis questions about my data. Ask me 5 questions that are going to help you do that with me. And then based on the questions it asked me, I sort of built the prompt for this workshop. But if it had just been me doing my own work, like day to day, I would have just answered its 5 questions and gone from there. And that would have been the context that it needs, usually to help me answer that question. I'm often, especially when I'm doing my research or doing my data analysis, I want to limit the AI's sort of leaps in logic as much as I can. If it's confused, I don't want it to make like a big leap to try to answer the question and then be wrong and me, not I'm always looking carefully to make sure I catch, any mistakes it's making or leaps in logic, but I want to limit those as much as I can. So I often tell it, if you're ever unsure about anything as you're doing this task, ask me instead of guessing. And it'll stop its processing, ask you a question, you answer it, and it'll keep going. Another thing I have found to be really helpful is that you can customize both ChatGPT and Claude. You might be able to do this with Copilot and Gemini too, I'm not sure. So that's probably worth a Google if these are the two that you use. By telling it more about you and the personality you'd like it to generally adopt. Um, so for example, I'm just going to actually pull up my own ChatGPT account, which feels strangely personal, like someone showing you their Google history or something. But this is my ChatGPT account, right? If I click on, if you're logged in, if you're not logged in, I don't think this will work. But if you're logged in, you click on your little picture up in the right-hand side. There's an option here to customize ChatGPT. And it asks you all of these different questions about yourself and what you want ChatGPT to act like. So it asks me what I do. I tell it I'm an applied social scientist and also a designer. Um, this is what's really useful though, down here at the bottom. Anything else ChatGPT should know about you? I've told it I work at the Kinder Institute. I'm an applied social sciences researcher, have a PhD in psychology. I do quantitative and qualitative research. I'm also a designer. I like to be efficient, but I also value creativity and making connections across different topics. What you include in here, like I said, this feels really personal, actually, strangely. What you include in here is totally up to you, but I found that after I updated this by telling it a little bit about how I'm a social scientist, where I work, it started presenting things to me in a way that were more relevant, using language that's more like the language that I use to talk about statistics, things like that. So another trick to make your prompts more effective. But above all, I'd say avoid the first try fallacy. So if you ask ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, to work with you on something and it does a horrible job at first, you've got 2 options, right? You could be like, I do not have time for this, give up and use your own totally un-AI augmented brain to do it, right? But if for whatever reason you want to continue using the AI to work with you on that task, just because it doesn't get it right on the first time does not mean you're doing anything wrong. Most of the things I show you today, some of them worked on the first try. Some of them I had to update what I was asking it 3 or 4 times to get to where we are now, what you're going to see. The time saving comes when you can reuse a lot of those prompts, right? So that PDF that I showed you all, I know that at least for me, with my version of ChatGPT, all of those prompts gave me, I thought, useful information to some extent. And I can reuse them and just kind of fill in the blanks with different research questions or goals or data cleaning problems sort of over and over and over. And that's where the time saving comes in, not at the beginning when you're trying to figure out, like, how do I talk to this thing? How does this thing work? Okay. So before we dive into the using the AI for our data processes, I want to know, like, what is your biggest data challenge right now? So go to that same website, slido.com, same code. If you're already in there, it should just pop right up for you. And I want to know, what is your biggest data challenge right now? It can be one that you think the AI can help you with, or one that you're like, there's no way, that this can actually address this data challenge that I have. But as we're going through the data life cycle, the data analysis process, and these examples, I want to know, what are you thinking about? What's hard right now? Okay, time. Yeah, especially for the qualitative analysis, right? It's like so important and so rich, but it takes a long time. Obtaining data, yeah, capacity, both time probably and skills, right? Because it doesn't matter how long you do this, there's always some other skill or some other analysis that you could learn. Cleaning data, we're definitely going to talk about that. A couple people saying cleaning data. Time to learn it. I don't have anything in here about it, but I will say I have used AI ChatGPT to teach me different analytical skills a few times over the past couple of months. That's been sort of interesting. I'll tell it to explain. I think I used it to refresh me on propensity score matching about a month ago. So creating matched groups for my analysis. And I told it to explain it to me like I was a college student. And that was really helpful. Missing data. Somebody put the code in. Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Challenges with organizational policy development as we use AI tools. We want to use the tools, but how we use the tools depends on our entities. Yeah, excellent point. And we're going to talk about organizational guidelines for AI use. We're going to talk in data analysis. We're going to look at an example from Urban Institute on like how they're trying to put guardrails around their AI use. Perfect. Someone also asked in the chat, how secured is the free version of ChatGPT? I would say assume it is not secured, which is like what people in the chat are saying as well, and I echo that. ChatGPT, which is run by a company, developed by a company called OpenAI, they use data on the internet as well as data that their users put in, the things you ask it, the things you type in, to train their model and make it better. Even if you pay for like an enterprise version of ChatGPT, I agree with what Angie said. Wait, oh no, what Megan said. Assume, assume anything you put in there can be accessed by someone else. Um, Even if they never do, assume that they could. Yeah. And we're going to talk about workarounds, at least that I have used. And I'm also totally open if someone's like, Autumn, that's not actually a workaround. There's still some issues there. Like, just be vulnerable with you about how I actually use it. And like, I definitely welcome any criticisms on that front too. Claude does say that they don't use user data to train their AI, but I don't know if that matters to me or if I believe them. So I would still assume it's not secured. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your biggest data challenges with me that you're having right now. I hope that as we go through these examples, you'll get some ideas for how this might, if not totally address the challenge, sort of kickstart you in your own development of solutions to these challenges. So I've broken this down into two parts because I often think about my own data analysis process in terms of like these two parts. Like, what do we want to know? What do we need to know? Like, what can we know from the data? The like thinking of analysis plans, analysis questions, how to conduct the research. And then the second part is like, what does the data tell us? How do we actually do the quantitative or qualitative analysis and interpret the results? So we're going to start with this first part of the process. What do we want to know? And we've already looked at this prompt a little bit. So this is a prompt that I came up with for developing analysis questions and analysis plans. I used this prompt on this data set. I'm going to go ahead and put the data set in the chat if you happen to want to use. So this is a CSV file called volunteers data, totally fake data. It has names in there and stuff like that, but completely fake, totally made it up. It has, let's just look at it actually. Okay. Yeah, so it's a data CSV file that's got a volunteer ID, it's got names, it's got the date that volunteer joined, the hours they volunteered, whether they're a coordinator or a helper. And then it's got some survey feedback that I've already like fake merged with their volunteer information, a satisfaction score with about their volunteer experience, whether or not they would recommend volunteering, and what their feedback is. I did use AI to generate these ridiculous feedback that it's not like real feedback. There's no like real richness in it like there would be with actual survey responses. But I just wanted to have a totally fake example for us to look at when it comes to qualitative analysis. So that's in the chat if you want to download that and actually like drop it into Claude or drop it into ChatGPT as we're working through these examples. Okay, so let's look at what happened when I ran this prompt. So I've just I ran the prompt. What I did when I was getting ready for this is I ran the prompt. I looked at what it told me, and then I just saved the conversation for us to look at. So this is like exactly how it responded to me when I ran this prompt. So I told it I would like help developing my analysis questions and analysis plan. It says, absolutely. Here's how I'd approach this as a data strategist at a mid-sized Houston-based community health nonprofit. You can see it's like parroting back to me what I told it to act as. It reiterates to me what my key goal that I told it was to improve the retention of volunteer coordinators. And it starts by giving me some questions, some research questions. Are coordinators with lower satisfaction scores more likely to stop volunteering? It tells me, like, gives me a high level analysis plan, what I could do in Excel, what I could use ChatGPT for as I'm trying to answer this research question. I don't like this research question because I can't answer it. So this is what I'm saying about like ChatGPT, Claude, any of these tools are not one-stop shops, if you will, for doing your analysis. It's given me an analysis question that would be really interesting, but I don't have some of the data that it's saying that I would need to answer this question. So this first one's a bust for me. I just move on, right? But then it also says, okay, what's the average tenure of coordinators? How long have they been volunteering? And is there any relationship between how long they've been volunteering and their satisfaction level or the kind of role they have. I do like that question and I can answer it, right? So that one gets a check mark from me. I kind of keep scrolling down here. It goes all the way to 5. It gives me 5 different questions. The links to all of these are in that prompt PDF that I sent you all. So you can read these too if you want to. Or you can try it on your own, right? We're going to have some time to try this on our own. But my point, I guess, by just showing you how it responds is to show you it's like not 100% going to, like, not 100% of this response is useful, but like I'd say 70% of it is a good starting place for me if I wanted to start thinking through how I could analyze this data. And this data is super simple, right? This data set is incredibly simple. My question was pretty simple. This becomes, I think, more and more useful as I start thinking about more complex questions that I have and like my actual data analysis and research that I do every day. Okay, so your turn. So I'm gonna give you all, let's say 5 minutes. So we'll go until like 9:51, 9:50. Copy that prompt about developing analysis questions and plans into ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you're using. You can do it exactly like I did. You can keep that fake information in there about needing some help retaining coordinators. You can just do it exactly like I did. Or you can get rid of everything in those brackets and try putting in some of your own information, right? Like maybe you have an organizational goal you're thinking about and some data that you think can help answer it. Take my information out of those brackets and just put yours in. And I really want to hear how'd it go, in like 5 minutes. Did anybody get anything useful, or was it like stuff you would have just thought of on your own or stuff that you couldn't actually answer? Let's see. And Jessica just put the prompts and the slides in the chat. I will also put the actual prompt in the chat if that's easier to just copy and paste it from there. And while we're taking some time to do this, feel free to put any questions, any hiccups you run into in the chat, or just unmute yourself and we'll chat about it while people are playing around.
Autumn, it's Jessica. While people are playing around, I have a question for you on this. So
Yes.
I can imagine you maybe run similar data analysis kind of frequently, often. Are you saving and going back into that same like chat history prompt to be like,
Yes.
hey, I did this a while back. Can you help me do this again? Because that's in my mind. I'll go back and do that sometimes with just like brainstorming activities. And I'm wondering if you've found utility in that for analysis.
Absolutely. So this is something that you have to have an account for, right? So that it
Yeah.
saves the threads you have and stuff. And so you can create longer chat threads that like go on for a longer amount of time because there's some limits if you're using just a plan or if you're not logged in. Again, this feels like incredibly personal.
I
I'm
know.
showing
I'm
you my
sorry, you don't
like
have to. You
thread
don't have to, but yeah,
history.
yes.
But like for example, I have a thread here. Wait a second. That's not a good one. Okay. So I have a thread. I don't know if I can show you. This is an example where when I work with ACS data, I have the same thread that when I need
Okay.
to
Yeah.
pull ACS data or know anything about ACS tables, I use the same thread because it knows how I always want them to give me the table name. I want them to give me a link to the table. I want them to tell me which variables, like the actual variable name. So I always use my ACS variables request chat thread, and that makes it more efficient for me, right? It also knows that I use R to pull like the API. I use like the census API via R to pull that data. So it also just automatically gives me the code to pull that table into R when I ask about any table, any variable. So yes, that's going to look totally different for each of
Yeah.
us, right? But yeah, I definitely do that.
Yeah. I think I'm just grappling with like I do like I think the a powerful use of generative AI is time saving. And so to have this, you did something and then you're like, wait, but how did I do that? Especially if you were using a prompt in GPT, Claude, whatever it might be, that just seems to me so helpful, knowing
Mhm,
that we should have this documented properly, like documentation for analysis. Shout out to
mhm,
that. But
mhm.
I think this is, I just wanted to talk that through. Yeah.
I also, something you can do, so how I've gotten to like save these conversations, when you talk about documentation, that is really important. I try to do that too. You can, so if you press the share button, at least on ChatGPT, and Claude has a similar option, it will give you like a link where you can like save this URL and it'll pull up the chat thread to that date whenever you generated the link when you click it. So if I ever need to go back and see exactly what I was doing in ChatGPT or Claude, and you can then save it, you could save the web page as like a PDF or whatever to be able to keep it indefinitely. But I do try to stay on top of my documentation in case anybody wants to know how I used it, or more on it, like honestly, if I want to know how I used it
Yeah.
further down the road. So I
Yeah.
use that feature a lot too.
Yeah, I love that. There's that like transparency in how we're using it. But you have tons of great stuff happening in the chat. So thank you for this little sidebar on this. Hopefully, this was a good little moment while folks were doing this activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's see what people are saying in the chat. Okay, nice. So Shannon said they got a detailed implementation plan with step-by-step directions. Yeah, I ask for a high level one, right? But I sometimes ask for a detailed one, especially when I've already narrowed down my analysis question and I want a plan. I'll ask it to generate a detailed methodological plan or detail or maybe sometimes I'll ask it because there's never one way to approach a problem, right? I'll ask it to give me multiple methodological plans or multiple options for analyzing the data to answer that one question. And I will, of course, choose the one that I think seems the most methodologically rigorous that also works with the data I have. Okay, Caitlin said a step-by-step process on how to produce the results I need. Yes, I think step-by-step is key. I never want it to give me an answer. I want it to give me a process, right? So that I can follow how it's working through a problem and check it every step of the way. Because the analysis that I'm doing it's important that we get it right or as right as we can. And I don't want to leave it up to another person, a computer, anyone, but me. I want to be the one to check it, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, Shannon said they like Claude better than Copilot. Claude is like anecdotally kind of like the artist or the novelist of all of the different chatbots. It's often the most creative, definitely more so than Copilot, which runs on top of ChatGPT, I think. So Copilot actually uses the same model as ChatGPT, so they often are very similar, and Claude is usually a little more creative. That's why people tend to say it does better at like the qualitative analysis. Yeah, so Betsy says they were able to run analysis, create visualizations, and provide recommendations. So that's really interesting. Feel free to say more, Betsy, about like what tool you were using and how you were able to get it to work through the process there. Yeah,
I can
delete.
explain a little bit
Logged into
more.
ChatGPT and delete your info is a link. Corinne, if you're asking about like if you created the link to a chat thread and then deleted the chat thread, does the link still work? I am not sure, actually. But that is a good question. If anybody knows, feel free to respond to Corinne. And then is it required to attach the data file? No, it is not required to attach the data file. In fact, I almost never attach a data file. Instead, I ask it to tell me what to do in Excel or in R or in Python. I do sometimes give it the data dictionary and description of my data because that's when it's going to help me out the most, because it'll give me less of those like research questions that I can't actually answer because I don't have the data, right? Um, so that's a great question. Although you can give it the data file, and we're going to look at an example of that later. And that's probably how Kelly got these actual, you have to give it a data file, right? To get it to do the analysis for you and generate the charts, but you need to do that always with like de-identified data, right? In our case, it's fake data, so it's not as important. Perfect. Giving the data dictionary, we got a +1 on that. That someone says that that's been really helpful for them. Yeah, okay, perfect. What are the guidelines for reporting AI tools when publishing the analysis process? There usually aren't any. We should talk about that though, because people are starting to develop more of them, and I found it depends on the journal. If you're talking about peer-reviewed publications, they usually each have their own rules about disclosures. So you have to check each one individually, and I think have your own personal guidelines, right, about what you want to disclose or what you think you should disclose. Cool. So it looks like a lot of you got something kind of useful out of that. And if you didn't, I do encourage you to not be discouraged, right? These tools work well for me, I think, because I've been using them for a long time. And like ChatGPT knows stuff about me. And so it gives me things that are more useful to me. And I've been practicing for a while, right? About what information it finds most useful. So even if it didn't work as well for you as it did for me or for some of these other people, keep giving it, keep talking to it if you're so inclined. Okay, so this is a fun one. Sourcing relevant data. I think I alluded to this actually when I showed you my ACS thread. I use ChatGPT to source data for me, especially like publicly available data is really what that's useful for. So I won't spend as much time on this example, but the prompt that I developed for this is, given our goal to increase coordinator engagement and retention, recommend 2 additional metrics or benchmarks we should capture in future data collection. So I actually, sorry, jumped ahead. I was thinking about sourcing publicly available data, but you might also think about how you can alter your own research practices to source more relevant data yourself in your surveys or in any other kind of assessments that you do. So let's look at this one really quickly. Okay. So I told it what my goal was, and I asked it to give me ideas for additional metrics or benchmarks. It told me I could capture the program's responsiveness, like how quickly do coordinators respond sorry, how fast do we as an organization respond to volunteers? It asked me to ask more questions about their well-being, their workload balance, how supported they feel, whether they have intent to stay. These are so-so. I tried this a few times and I got some more useful options when I like kept probing it by telling it what I did and didn't like about the options that it gave me. But it's more so a way, this one was more so a way for me to like start the process of thinking through what are the additional metrics I could capture. Okay. So this one is more about sourcing relevant publicly available data that's online. So here for this, I asked it to recommend to me public health data sources for Harris County. I gave it some examples, you don't necessarily have to, that we could combine with our community clinic service logs. And I told it to also include instructions for accessing the data and key variables to pull. Because it's often not enough for it just to tell me that a data set exists, right? I want it to tell me how to access it. So this one was kind of interesting. Okay, so this one was kind of interesting because it was about 50-50 in terms of how helpful it was. So it told me that there's this HRSA uniform data system, and I can go to the HRSA data warehouse. But I click on it and it just it takes me to kind of like a home page. It doesn't take me to any kind of like specific report. So it gives me like a start, but I still have to click around. If you worked in community health, you'd probably already know about this data set. But me not working in community health, this was useful to me, right? It pulled this for me. I could explore, maybe I'm interested in maternal and child health and see what data is available. It told me there's this thing called the Texas Healthcare Information Collection. I click the link it gives me. It says page not found. This happens a lot when you ask it to link you to things, especially if it's something, sometimes it'll link you to like an older URL that it maybe collected years ago that's not active anymore, which is probably what's happened here. Maybe they've, Texas Health and Human Services has moved some stuff around on their website so that URL is not active. I still have to click around and find where they have their data and their case reporting, click on Texas health data, and maybe I can find some maternal health data there. And so on and so forth. So you can see it tells me about CDC places, tells me about some Texas county level dashboards. We don't have time to go through all of these and kind of like what it's doing, but you can see it's also telling me it's trying to tell me key variables to pull. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. It's more just a place for me to start looking. Okay. So let's take 5 more minutes and try this ourselves. So let's try, if you are so inclined, try the sourcing publicly available data prompt. Again, you can use this exactly like I've written it, or you can put your own information in. So maybe you work for a housing nonprofit or basic needs. Put your information in instead of like the community health information and see what it pulls for you. So we will give us like 5 minutes, so like 10 after. Someone says in the chat, it's interesting to see the difference in responses between your chat GPT and mine with the same prompt. I agree. That's why I tried to build in time for us all to try it if we want to, because it's much more useful to see how it responds to you and how you might have to tweak it on your own, computer as opposed to what I've done. But I also think it reinforces this really important, almost philosophical point, right? That it doesn't look for truth. If it was looking for truth, it would give me and Kelly the same answer, right? It's predicting what it thinks is like the next most likely token, or it's predicting what it thinks is the most likely answer. But we know that the most likely answer is not always our best approximation of the truth. Perfect. Thanks for coming, Kelly. Yeah, I know some of you may need to hop off, so Feel free to email me too if you have any questions about anything we didn't get to in the session. Yes, my email on the slides and in the chat. So whether you have to leave early or not, I look forward to hearing from some of you. Oh, fascinating. So we've got a message in the chat here that says it's interesting to compare the three platforms and what they respond. They're using Copilot, Claude, and ChatGPT. Very different responses. Which do you like the best? I tend to like ChatGPT the best. I don't know if that's like a personality thing or what, but I do tend to stick with ChatGPT. Nice. Okay. So Copilot, ChatGPT. Yeah. And I do think for me, again, it's more like this isn't as useful to me if it doesn't save me time sometimes. So I usually just like pick one and stick with it for the most part, one that I know works for me and that's learned about me and what I like. Okay, we've got some more because it was the pioneer. That's why I like ChatGPT. Maybe it was it was the first one I ever used. So maybe we just like what we know. I mean, that is true. Psychologically, we like what we know. Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, so Shannon says I changed the prompt to include my organization and it shared how to contact that you'd need an access to request access and then some variables to pull within my organization to include with the data request. Okay. Yeah, so the more you tell it about yourself and the work you do, generally the more useful information you'll get. I will say sometimes it will make things up. I hope that this was correct, but sometimes it will make things up. It's not as bad about this as it used to be, but I find that it happens more often when I ask it to do things that involve accessing the internet, because especially on the free version, I think it only goes up to a few years ago, the information that it has online, so it's not always like up to date, which leads to some errors sometimes when I'm asking it to do things that involve searching. Cool. Yes, Jerry says the picture recognition has improved. It has. I still find it's not up to where it needs to be super useful to me day to day, but it definitely has improved. I never use the picture generation on ChatGPT, so I don't know that if someone, I really only use it for like writing, coding. Those are like the two things that I use it for in my everyday life, if you will. Um, but if anyone has any experiences with the picture generation or video generation, feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay. Perfect. So thanks for sharing your experiences with kind of how sourcing relevant data went. Let's move on now to analysis. What does the data tell us? How can we use any of these tools to kind of assist us in our quantitative and qualitative analysis? So these are, I got a few examples that I'm just going to show you, and then I have one more that we're going to do together. So the first is cleaning. I know a couple of people mentioned cleaning data was a problem that they have, like a challenge that they have. I intentionally made that data file that I dropped in the chat, the volunteer data, I made it messy. Lots of different date formats. The names had some spacing issues, weird casing stuff. I want it to, this is like a simple, basic data cleaning task, right? I wanted it to help me clean those two columns. Let's see. And I told it specifically, I'm doing this in Excel. So write me the Excel formulas to standardize the date to this format and clean the names to proper case. So let's see what it did. Okay. So I gave it my instructions. It tells me I can use, assuming my data is in this cell, use this formula. If that doesn't work, use this formula that has an error handler. Okay, perfect. I tried that. It worked for me. It also told me to clean names to the proper case. I would use this formula. I tried it. It worked for me. It gave me an example of like how this would work. It asked me if I'd like a downloadable template with these formulas already set up. I didn't ask it to do that, but it was nice of it to offer. You'll find that especially ChatGPT does this a lot. It'll ask like, would you like me to X or Y, right? And you can sort of follow the trail for as long as it's useful. Oh, I lied. I forgot. The formula didn't work for me at first exactly. So the date formula where I asked it to help me standardize the date. I gave it back the formula and I said, this didn't work. And it's like, thanks for flagging that. It's like so endlessly positive. Um, and when it says when that doesn't work, it usually means this is happening. It knows what version of Excel I'm using and what, what kind of computer I'm using it on. Again, another example of like, if you use one tool and stick with it, it'll remember these things. And it says, here's a more robust approach using these different functions to handle multiple different date formats without Power Query. I don't use Excel. Some of you are probably like Excel power users, but I just wanted a formula. It gave me this formula, explained to me how it works. I used this one and that worked for me. So I kind of troubleshooted, like I said, don't be discouraged if it doesn't work the first time. You can often troubleshoot in the chat. And to do that, I usually kind of do exactly that. I tell it what I tried, the function I tried, the code I tried, where I clicked, and I say, this didn't work, or I did this and it gave me this error. And it usually, often right after that, it'll give me a version that works. Sometimes we have to go back and forth 2 or 3 times, but it's pretty good at troubleshooting with you in the chat. Another data cleaning thing I asked it to do was to convert like NA values, written out numbers, blank values in that hours volunteered column to numeric hours or blank. You can see it took me very literally. So it gave me the Excel code to literally just look for the written out word 8 and turn it into an 8, right? But that's not what I wanted. I wanted a more general function to turn any written out number to a number. I would have told it that, right? I could have told it that, it would have updated the function, but oftentimes it will sort of intuit what you may have wanted. So it's like, would you like help expanding this to cover other written out numbers? I told it yes. It gave me a function that worked. It did that, cleaned up that hours volunteered column. A quantitative analysis example, again, this is a super simple one. I just wanted to look, I know one of those analysis questions that it gave us was like, what's the relationship between hours volunteered and their satisfaction score? So I asked it to draft an Excel formula to compute the correlation between how long people have been volunteering for and their satisfaction score on a survey, fake survey that I'd given them. And I won't belabor this point here, but it does it. And I'm pretty sure this one did it on the first time too. Let's see. Yeah. So it again says, let me break this down for you step by step. And it gives me a few different options for how to do it and gives me an explanation for how it works, even some data hygiene checks that I can do before I run the correlation. And then it helps me try to understand how to interpret the results. It'll tell me it's going to be between -1 and 1, and the closer it is to 0, the more there's like no linear relationship. Okay, so we had a lot of questions about the qualitative analysis at the beginning. In that example that I gave you all, there's that feedback column where it has like some fake feedback from about the volunteer experience from the surveys. So I tell it when I want qualitative analysis, here are some open-ended feedback comments from our organization's volunteers. Summarize the top 3 themes and draft a 3-sentence narrative you could share with stakeholders. You could totally change that last sentence depending on what you want out of your qualitative analysis. This is also a super simple qualitative analysis prompt, kind of for the purposes of this workshop, but I'm often sometimes I'm predefining the themes I want it to look for. If like for my particular research question, I have like a coding scheme that's already set, right? I'm not developing it from the ground up. I'm implementing it from the top down. I might tell it, look for themes of X, Y, and Z. Sometimes I'll tell it to apply those categories or those codes in a new document and tell it like, if it's not sure, leave it blank. I'll code it myself, right? But I do sometimes ask it to code those responses instead of just summarizing the top 3 themes and drafting a 3-sentence narrative. One thing you should be really careful of with putting qualitative data in is that we often think of sensitive data being in the identifiers, but people sometimes put identifiers in their open-ended feedback, right? So making sure when you upload qualitative data, open-ended feedback into ChatGPT, if you do that, or Claude, that there's no identifiable information in what people have shared. In which case it would be a no-go. This is just not a good tool if that's the case all over the place, right? So let's look at what it does. I did this with both ChatGPT and Claude. Okay. It's saying unable to display visualization because I gave it a spreadsheet. It's saying it's unable to display that spreadsheet that I put in. Okay, so it identified 3 themes: an engaging hands-on experience, communication and clarity gaps, and operational and resource challenges. And then it also drafted a 3-sentence narrative like I asked it to do. I asked Claude to do the same thing. It identified a positive team environment, process and communication challenges, resource and time constraints. So relatively similar across the 2 different platforms, just slightly different in the way it's chosen to frame these themes and the way it kind of ties them all together in the narrative. If you actually sat down and read this, you'd see it's kind of making some leaps in the narrative in terms of like it's saying these unclear communication and process efficiencies diminish volunteer effectiveness and satisfaction. It doesn't necessarily know that, right? Like it didn't test whether those that kind of feedback was related to volunteer effectiveness or satisfaction. It'll often try to like beef up these narratives I found when it's analyzing qualitative data. So it's really important to like give it a sanity check, right? But one thing that Jessica mentioned doing before you all hopped on here when it comes to qualitative analysis is using 2 tools as a matter of course. to do that qualitative analysis and then comparing the two. I guess sort of like an AI version of iterator reliability, right? To kind of double check their work. And then, of course, you should also have maybe read through them as well, right? So you can know, like, is this tracking with what I generally saw as I was reading through the feedback too? Okay. So the last thing that I want to show you all here is related to what someone was talking about in the chat earlier, which was getting the AI to do the cleaning, the analysis, and the visualization sort of all in one chat. And I often think of these as my like open-ended data analysis requests. I almost never do this, just as to be completely transparent, but I want you to know that it is an option in case it's something that would work for you and the way that you work with data. But I will say, if you're going to do this, you need to upload data directly into ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot. And so to do that, you need to make sure you're using de-identified data only. I usually check a couple of things. I make sure there's no names, email addresses, of course, zip codes. I give each respondent like a unique ID where if I need to match them back later on my own with the names for any reason or any of the identifiable information, I can do that. So I make sure each respondent has a unique ID. There's no sensitive information in the free response or in any of the other columns. And then you can just upload the CSV file directly to visualize data in the same chat thread. So let's look at how that worked. So I did this with that volunteer data analysis. Sorry, these links can be a little finicky. So I started with a really open-ended prompt. I uploaded the CSV file and I said, can you analyze this data about my nonprofit's volunteers? That is extremely open-ended. I would almost never do that, right? Because I always have some kind of research question or research goal in mind that I would include here as well. Oh, Tiffany said example of a unique ID. So let's just look at the this column, volunteer ID. So like V001, V002, a unique identifier for each row that's not personal information. Okay. So you can see it does a couple of things. First, it gives me a summary of the data that it sees. And it gives me some initial observations. It says, I see you've already cleaned some of these like columns, right? This is usually a good check to make sure, is it understanding the data that I have correctly? And then it gives me some options. There's a few directions that we can take from here. We can do these different kinds of analysis. I said I would like to do the analysis 1, 2, and 3. I didn't really care about 4 at the time. And then it does it, right? You might need to spot check some of this, but I found that when it just does calculations, it's generally pretty accurate. So it just goes ahead and calculates for me the average number of hours volunteered by my coordinators versus my helpers, median, and then how many of them were in my data set. It calculates the satisfaction based on their volunteer role, whether or not they recommend. It does the counts for each role, how long it's been since they've joined. I see it's pretty similar. And then it tells me it tries to find some satisfaction insights. It's like there's a moderate negative correlation between hours volunteered and the satisfaction score. This could suggest people who volunteer more might be slightly less satisfied, which is worth looking into. Thanks, ChatGPT. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, right? But it's an interesting place to start. And then so on and so forth, right? I ask it a few other questions. I won't go into those right now since we're running out of time. But you can look at it if you need or want ideas for like how could you go through this process. Um, I asked it to clean the data, the dates here. I think for whatever reason, I didn't have this version cleaned for the dates. And then I asked it, like, how did you deal with the ones that were invalid? And it tells me, here's how I handled that kind of data. So again, I'm like checking its work, right, in different ways. Okay. So, I do really, I've given you an de-identified data set about, it's like a toy data set. It's really simple, right? The volunteers data. I also have a de-identified donor data set that I'll drop in the chat. We're not going to do this now because I want to make sure we briefly touch on the last part here. But if you do want to play around with this on your own time by telling it, here's some data about my nonprofit's donors. Can you help me analyze it and see what it does? You have a de-identified, totally fake data set to play around with. So that's in the chat. I've also included a link in the slides to an older presentation that I actually gave. I've given it a couple of different places, but it's got more detail on using AI for data visualization specifically. If you want to take a look at that, if that's something that you're interested in. But let's finish up here. So I asked you at the beginning, like, where did these issues, these different ethical and security issues come up for you? So in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself as well, that's fine. Just drop, like, did you notice any places that I might have had issues or you might have issues with data privacy, bias, community trust, compliance, security, transparency? Where were we thinking about those things as we were looking through these examples? While I'm letting these come through in the chat, because I know I'm like asking you to do something that takes some time to type out, I want to say that a lot of every organization is different. Every use case is different, but having organizational policies, or I like to have personal policies about how I'm going to use AI to act as guardrails to make sure that I'm using it responsibly. So what might those include? I've included an example that I like. I like it because I think it relates really closely to the work I do, which is like applied research, and I think might apply on your end as well, since a lot of you are data people, evaluation people from Urban Institute. So that's linked there. Check that out. But a couple of things that they include in their organizational use policies that I really like. Use cases. So are you going to use AI for writing or analysis, but not for photo or video generation? Or maybe some other combination? What are you okay with using it for? What are you not okay with using it for? Confidentiality, identifiable information, confidential information should almost never be entered into a generative AI tool. Different people have different, like I think Urban says you can submit it to the IRB or whatever and maybe get permission to do that. But me personally, like my personal guardrail is that this just isn't the tool for me if I need to analyze confidential or personally identifiable data. Human review, AI generated content should always be reviewed for plagiarism, bias, inaccuracy, kind of building that into your own process instead of having it be an afterthought. And then evolution. So AI is a rapidly evolving technology. So your personal guardrails and your organizational guardrails should be evolving as well, right? Because what it's good at today and the security concerns we have today and what it's bad at today are all going to be different like next week, right? I also think it's good practice to stay, you don't have to be an expert or anything, but staying like up to date on how it works is also a good practice in terms of using it ethically and responsibly. um, and like different privacy policies, like somebody dropped the privacy policy, I think, for OpenAI in the chat, like staying up to date about that information for the tools that you use. And then someone also mentioned, right, the environmental impacts, like that's important to a lot of us, right? So it's worth being intentional about understanding the different impacts of any technology we use, right? Whether that's AI or something else. Perfect. All right, so I know we're at time, so if anyone has to hop off, like I said, please do feel free to reach out to me if there was like a question you had that I didn't get to or a follow-up that you have. I'm always excited to talk about this with anyone, but for anyone who wants to stick around, I'm also happy to take questions or respond to comments now. Perfect. And Jessica's put the feedback in the chat as well. Perfect. Thank you all. I know your feedback is a gift, but your attention is a gift. Attention is hard to come by these days, for myself included. So I really appreciate all of the attention that you've given me today.
While we wait to see if folks have more questions for Autumn, please, please, please give her a warm round of applause. Send her some chat. I already see the chat love of all the thank yous, and this is amazing. And so, Autumn, you are pure joy to me, and this was super informational, super useful. And so, thank you so much for bringing this to Coffee and Quality today. So, thank you, thank you, thank you, all the thank yous.
Perfect. Yeah, and we do have a few questions. I missed one from Alicia. I hope they're still here. They asked if we think the themes are starting to get a bit biased, how might we encourage the chat to think outside the box? So I have done a few things. One, I have told it, if I just want it generally to think outside the box, I'll tell it prioritize creative and unorthodox responses as like a little add-on to the end of my prompt, right? Whether that's when it's coding, maybe I wouldn't do that when it's coding, but if it's just if it's getting stuck in a rut, if you will, I'll tell it that. For coding, I sometimes tell it what theoretical lens I want it to look through. So I might tell it to look through the lens of like critical race theory, for example. And this is going to be different for all of us, right? But for some of my work, it's like concerned with equity. I might tell it to look through that kind of lens, maybe a feminist lens or something. That's all going to be up to you and your theoretical orientation, right? But I found by giving it and I've read some literature on this too, that they've a couple papers I read tested how good it was at taking on like a critical race theory lens. And it was pretty good. It did that pretty effectively, at least by those raters' estimations, right? So I'll tell it to do that sometimes too. Thank you for that question. Okay, someone said, Valerie says confidentiality and security are really important. Yeah, you would not, that kind of data, you would not even de-identify it, I don't think, and put it into any of these tools. If I was going to use AI at all for such sensitive information, I'd probably use it more in the like, how do I write this formula kind of realm, right? Like where you're asking it to give you something that you then paste in your own computer to do the analysis so you can keep the data separate from this like AI tool. Any other questions or comments, things you think I should be thinking about as I'm doing this and teaching it to people? Okay, well, We'll stay on for as long as Jessica tells me to stay on, but I will say seriously, I hope some of you reach out if you have any, especially if you're like, Autumn, you didn't talk about this and this is like really important. I want to hear that as well. Like I really appreciate, I'm gonna look into the environmental stuff. So when I teach this later, we can address that because I think okay, we got a message from Edith. If used for narrative storytelling, always tell it to use facts. Okay, so correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but sometimes I tell it like, I tell it absolutely do not make anything up or make any leaps in logic. I tell it to only include things that it can back up with the data or whatever, like explicitly. Yes, okay, perfect. That's what you mean. So you can be really explicit about that too, and that's good practice as well. Thank you, Edith. Thanks, Corinne. That's a nice compliment, but I feel like I'm just playing around all the time with this sort of tool. So the knowledge does come from just messing around. Never messing around, I hope, with any kind of sensitive data or anything like that. But in terms of messing around, like, how do I talk to this tool and to get it to help me the most?
Awesome. Well, Autumn, thank you for sticking around with us, for giving us 6 extra minutes. Thank you to everyone else for giving us 6 extra minutes, for all your time, all your engagement. We really appreciate it. We are packaging up all of the items to get them over to everybody for the recording, the prompts, all the good things. So thank y'all so much for joining, and we hope you will join us next time for a special Coffee and Quality in July, which is a case study that's going to feature Humble Area Assistance Ministries. They're going through that experience right now. So really excited to hear what they've learned and then takeaways for other nonprofits to apply back at their organization. So thank you all so much. We'll see you at the next one. Bye. And thank you, Autumn.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.